people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
News.
Man, $80 is pretty steep. I hope that it is discounted if you already have your DAZN membership. But, you know, at the end of the day, I buy every fucking pay-per-view. Like, a lot of these dudes that's complaining about this shit, they fucking thieves anyways. Even if this shit was $30, they wouldn't buy this shit. With the $30 shit for AJ, a lot of motherfuckers were talking about, I'm streaming that shit. Like, they were back on the back call, like, yeah, I'm watching it right now. Oh, what you watching now? Oh, on crack streams or some shit. Like, that shit $30 and you can't pay for it. Like, motherfuckers don't buy shit. They don't really support shit. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, $80 is steep. I agree, especially if there's no real undercard. I mean, who knows who the fuck is fighting, but motherfuckers don't really support anyways. I mean, shit, Brandon talking about going to the bar.
That's what I've been saying here on this channel for years. That's what I've been saying. Those who are critical of a DAZN pay-per-view and lambast it, saying they're not going to pay for it, they're going to steal it, do so.
As if they pay for anything.
Yeah, you don't pay for DAZN pay-per-views, but you don't pay for PBC pay-per-views either. And that's indicative in the PBC's numbers. Nobody's putting out more pay-per-views than the PBC. Nobody has been in the American market for years. Year after year, they have single-handedly oversaturated the market with box office fights, to where if you're a big PBC fan and you like a lot of their fighters, well, it must be very expensive for you to watch many of their fights, since so many of them are tucked behind a paywall. Now, these are the guys that get on their high horse whenever DAZN is doing a pay-per-view. Even though DAZN doesn't really do as many pay-per-views as Showtime was doing, or Fox when they were in boxing, now Amazon, it seems like all the PBC's content is going to be exclusively pay-per-view.
If not most of it.
And it's just like the caller said. The show they did in Saudi that was headlined by Anthony Joshua and Francis Ngannou, what was a great show that didn't cost a lot of money. It was only $30. I myself saw people online saying they weren't going to buy it, they were going to steal it, they were going to stream it, even though that show is less expensive than the majority of PBC shows.
$30 is too much to ask, but $80 isn't?
You're a big PBC fan of PBC fighters, they're asking you to come out of pocket $75, $80 several times a year. So how could the same people that have to pay so much money to see so much of the PBC's content suddenly decide that $30 is too much for a pay-per-view on DAZN? How does that work?
They're stealing them.
They're not just stealing the pay-per-views they do on DAZN, they're stealing the PBC's pay-per-views as well. In truth, they steal everything they watch. They don't actually support anybody online. Oh, they'll stand on their soapbox and defend the PBC vigorously to anyone who criticizes them. All the while, they're stealing their content too, because they don't actually support anyone.
Anything.
They'll call you a racist if you're critical of Al Heyman and the number of pay-per-views he's putting out there. They'll call you a racist. They'll call you a bigot for being critical of Al, for being critical of the PBC, how many pay-per-views they put out there, and whether or not they're actually pay-per-view worthy. They'll call you out of your name for being critical of him. All the while, they're stealing his content.
Why?
Because it's too expensive for them, which validates the criticism.
That he's putting out too many pay-per-views, that he's putting too many fights behind a paywall?
That is the criticism, and the consequence is how many people end up pirating those fights, end up pirating those streams, illegally streaming those pay-per-views, because they shouldn't be on pay-per-view to begin with.
Then why are they?
I said it in my previous video. They may have started out doing that out of greed, trying to chase a few more dollars, short-term gains that have long-term consequences. And the consequence of putting so many fights behind a paywall is the audience started to shrink, because people aren't going to fork over $80 at a time, but so many times throughout the calendar year, especially if they have alternatives, cheaper ones to your programming. The short answer is, they may have started doing it out of greed, but at this point, they're doing it out of necessity.
Need.
They're doing it because they don't have much of a choice, and they don't seem to have much of a commitment from Amazon. If they did, they wouldn't have to put so many of these fights behind a paywall. If they're doing that,
It's to pay the fighters.
it's because it's the only way they can get the fighters their money. Without a network like a Fox or a Showtime to give them a hefty annual budget to do shows throughout the calendar year, without that, they are reduced to billing practically every fight as a pay-per-view, because that's the only way to pay the fighters.
Even if the fights ain't pay-per-view worthy.
Which in turn alienates a large chunk of the boxing community at large that would like to see those fights but can't afford to. They can't afford to pay for that many pay-per-views throughout the calendar year, so what do they end up doing? They end up stealing them.
And then getting upset at me for pointing it out.
But as critical as I am of Al Heyman, his PBC, and their business practices, you know what I don't do? You know what I don't do?
What?
I don't steal his content.
Nope.
You do that.
Oh, you're pseudo-activism.
Is that what you think you are? An activist, when you go up to bat for Al Heyman while simultaneously stealing his content.
You're a freedom fighter?
Near as I can tell, Al Heyman needs more guys like me. And less guys like you.
You fucking bum.
Twitter tweets and online comments are not going to keep the lights on over there at the PBC. Cash money
Is what they need.
not a bunch of mouthy pricks mouthing off online, all the while stealing whatever content he puts out there. And you may be asking yourself, you got all of this from people criticizing Devin Haney's undercard?
Yeah, because of who's criticizing him.
Big Gervonta Davis fans. Gervonta Davis, who's been on pay-per-view exclusively for the last, 3 or 4 years?
Just about.
Big Gervonta Davis fans are the ones criticizing Devin Haney's undercard. Big Gervonta Davis fans, big PBC fans,
Those guys.
Heymanites.
Because you're either spending a small fortune on all those PBC pay-per-views they put out, or, what's more likely, you're stealing all of them while criticizing DAZN.
That doesn't make any sense. But then again, neither do you and your pseudo-activism. You want to pretend that you stand for something. You stand for nothing.
Zero.
And your support, quote-unquote support, which is little more than just arguing with strangers online who are critical of the PBC, all the while you're stealing from them, is no real support at all, because you don't show up where it counts the most.
In the numbers.
You're not going to when you steal their content. And I know you are. You're not paying for all those pay-per-views, then turning around and complaining about what was a $30 pay-per-view for Joshua versus Ngannou or Devin Haney's upcoming pay-per-view. No.
No fucking way.
You're just a misguided idiot who can't shut the fuck up.
Be quiet.
So you're not buying Devin's pay-per-view. Boo-hoo. You don't buy shit anyway.
You fucking bums.
You know, what's coming up? What you guys got going on?
Yeah,
in the
so
future?
we got a fight. I don't know if it's June 15th or June 22nd, but I'm going to fight for the light heavyweight title. Light heavyweight interim title, and then on the same night, Gervonta Davis is going to fight
It's gonna
Frank
be huge,
Martin.
man.
Fucking lit card. It's going to be amazing. Probably going to be the biggest card
Where's it gonna be?
of the whole year. I don't know. It's either going to be in Vegas or Houston.
Okay. I was gonna ask. I know you didn't know where it was.
Yeah,
but
it's going to be a fucking big fight. So I'm very excited. I'm working hard for that. And
There's been some skepticism as to whether or not David Benavidez would follow through with that Alexander Gvozdyk fight due to some comments that his promoter made, that they may forego that fight if they can fight Canelo Alvarez in September. It seems that David is holding to that fight. He's holding to the Gvozdyk fight because he does not believe Canelo Alvarez will fight him, and so he is now targeting the Dimitri Bivol versus Artur Beterbiev winner, saying, I don't think that Canelo fight's gonna happen, so I've got to move on. These guys at 175 are some killers. Now, my mind is 100% focused on them, and we already know that Turki Al-Sheikh extended an olive branch to David a few weeks ago, offering to make a fight between him and the winner of that fight, going as far as saying that even though the loser has a rematch clause they can activate, they'll hold that off so that David can get his crack at the apple.
My thoughts.
I actually like the Gvozdyk fight because the Gvozdyk fight satisfies something that I've wanted to see from David for a long time. It seems to me like he's more often than not been matched with opponents that are smaller than he is, opponents who really aren't punchers, don't have much punching power,
Further allowing him to outsize them.
and thereby outgun them. Whereas with Alexander Gvozdyk is a bigger guy than your run-of-the-mill guy that David fights. He's a bigger guy, a longer guy, a stronger guy, and a more well-schooled boxer, a former world champion at 175 pounds who can move around, box and punch.
I expect that the whole time David is up there, making his bones at 175, we're going to hear a lot of incessant bitching and moaning and whining.
That even though he's already made his decision to campaign at 175 moving forward, taking aim at the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol, that's not going to stop him, his father, and his promoter from using the name of Canelo Alvarez to sell his fights. In effect, dragging Canelo Alvarez's name in the mud.
I expect it.
That's what they're going to do, though tomfoolery aside, the fight itself with Alexander Gvozdyk, I actually like that fight. And I wonder if David can come through it. As David Benavidez is best described as a rather crude, a rather simple pressure fighter. A pressure fighter who has largely benefited from being bigger than most of the guys at 168, an advantage he may not have up there at 175.
Why do you keep calling him crude?
Because even among pressure fighters, there are levels, there are tiers, and based on how many bells and whistles that pressure fighter has, that's what determines if he's a A-level pressure fighter, B-level, C-level, D-level.
There's levels. You hear it all the time.
What makes David a rather crude pressure fighter, as opposed to somebody else, is that David doesn't show much of a jab. That's not saying David never throws a jab or he never uses it. That's saying that he doesn't use it that often.
As opposed to somebody else.
Boxing fans, being as obtuse as they can be, often living in extremes, saying that David Benavidez doesn't show much of a jab doesn't mean he never throws it.
It means he doesn't throw it enough, doesn't use it enough when closing the distance.
It's not a big part of his arsenal in all the ways it's a big part of Artur Beterbiev's arsenal, who throws very short jabs, double jabs, triple jabs, to close the distance safely while keeping the other guy's guns holstered. So while he inches forward, he's not getting hit on the way in. The guy's tucked behind his guard as Artur shoots those jabs, and then he can bring other punches over. Stronger punches, bigger punches, uppercuts up the middle, hooks around the side.
This is not about Artur Beterbiev.
This is about David Benavidez. This is about David and what David is missing, and why I don't consider him a particularly high-level pressure fighter. He doesn't show much of a jab.
Shoulders are often square.
Mid-range to inside. He often squares up, and you don't want to do that, both toes facing your opponent, because if you get caught with a counter, you don't have that back foot behind you to support your weight. You could get caught off balance.
Knocked on your ass.
The way he got knocked on his ass years ago in the Ronald Gavril fight as he was coming forward.
Yeah.
It's a deficiency David has had for a long time now. It's noticeable, but it's not a deficiency that just anybody can exploit.
That's why he gets away with it.
Because a lot of these guys that he fights ain't big punchers. Demetrius Andrade, Caleb Plant, Anthony Durrell, these are not guys that are known for power.
They may not be able to exploit it, but somebody else might.
Someone else can. Someone a little bigger, a little stronger, up there at 175. Questions will need answers.
David's gonna have to answer them.
Can he stay in character? Can he stay in character up there? Can he do that against Gvozdyk, against Bivol, against Beterbiev? Can he stay the Mexican monster? Because he might get out-muscled by Artur and out-hustled by Dimitri. It all depends on who ends up winning their fight. You have to remember, last year when he fought Caleb Plant, 2 of the 3 judges had Caleb Plant winning most of the first half. Most of the rounds in the first 6.
Right.
It's not until the pace of the fight caught up to Caleb Plant that he started slowing down, losing rounds, getting hit. Dimitri Bivol, comparatively, has a better engine than Caleb Plant because Caleb Plant, characteristically, fight by fight, slows down after the first half, whereas Dimitri, he can maintain a pace, maintain that tempo. He did in the Zurdo Ramirez fight. And we're imagining a scenario where Dimitri actually goes 12 with Artur. If he can go 12 with Artur, he can go 12 with David.
If he can go 36 minutes taking Artur's power, he can definitely go 36 minutes taking David's.
Because Artur is a much bigger puncher than David Benavidez. Not a single one of those guys that David's been in there with would go 12 with Artur. Caleb Plant don't hear the final bell with an Artur Beterbiev, but he did with David.
What about the holding?
What about the fucking holding? David is noticeably bigger than Caleb. What are you telling me, that he couldn't wrestle his way out of the clinch with an exhausted Caleb Plant?
for 4 rounds. He was running on fumes for the last 4 rounds of that fight. If that were Artur in there with that same Caleb Plant, he don't hear the final bell. It don't go the distance. So I reiterate, if Dimitri can withstand the onslaught from Artur Beterbiev for 36 minutes, go 12 rounds with that guy taking his power, and still win, he can take David's power. David's not as big a puncher. And not as good a boxer. Not as fundamentally sound or creative with his offense. He is a lot more simple pressure fighter than Artur Beterbiev is. Remember, David's targeting the winner, and we're operating on the assumption that Dimitri wins. If Dimitri doesn't, if Artur wins, if Artur stops him, if he stops Dimitri and then David has to deal with him, Artur's too strong. He's a better grade of pressure fighter and a noticeably stronger pressure fighter than David. Yeah, David might be a little taller and a little longer, but he's softer in the body. He's a very fleshy fighter, the way he carries his weight and where it's distributed, whereas Artur's a tank. Artur's all muscle. Built like a fucking rock. You go standing in front of that guy trying to put punches together, shoulder square, he's gonna put you in a fucking hospital. You will notice that David punches a lot wider than Artur Beterbiev. Even though they're both pressure fighters and volume punchers, Artur has better form, throws shorter hooks, shorter punches, whereas David's are much wider. That makes them less defensible. It leaves room for a guy like Artur to catch him in between with short hooks, short uppercuts. And what has become the year mark for Artur over the years is the punches don't have to travel very far to do a lot of damage because he's naturally heavy-handed with power in both hands. He shoots from the hip. He doesn't have to load up his punches. A fight between David Benavidez and Artur Beterbiev, two pressure fighters, two pressure-style fighters, would be a fight of the year candidate. That's, if it happens, that's if Artur beats Dimitri and David holds to his word that he wants the winner of that fight. And therein lies a dilemma. What? Artur Beterbiev is a top-ranked guy. Dimitri Bivol, he's a matchroom fighter. David's with the PBC. How do we know that this doesn't devolve into another sides of the street argument? We may all have to curb our enthusiasm. No, it doesn't have to be bad news that David is reshifting his focus from Canelo towards the winner of this fight. That doesn't have to be bad news, but it could be if he's bullshitting. If he's just talking. I've long maintained that Canelo Alvarez not fighting David Benavidez for whatever reason, it doesn't really hurt his legacy, not that by itself. And David's ability to hurt Canelo's legacy is only as good as his ability to create his own legacy. But if all he ends up doing at 175 is talking about Canelo Alvarez in interviews and not fighting the winner of this fight due to politics, he's not hurting anybody. He's not doing anything. But didn't Turkey offer him the winner of the fight? He did. And didn't Turkey offer Gervonta Davis a Devin Haney fight? He did. In spite of that, when push came to shove, we see what Gervonta Davis elected to do. He elected to fight Frank Martin, who's not even as popular as Devin Haney, instead. So just because Turkey offers the PBC guy an opportunity like this doesn't mean the PBC guy takes it. We've been watching this collection of fighters turn down big opportunities for years. It could happen again. Broly turned down a main event with Ryan Garcia to fight in a co-main event against Isaac Cruz. What's more counterintuitive than that? No, this doesn't have to be bad news if David is serious. If he means business and he really wants the winner of that fight. But the question is, does he? That's a story that only time can tell. Looking forward to finding out.